Welcome, I'm Midnight Redditor, and tonight we're gonna go over the subreddit r/nosleep, where OP meets his real monsters in his closet. So sit back, relax, because as we all know, nothing good happens after midnight. Our story tonight comes from Not On My Books. Everyone has heard of the boogeyman, a creature tall and dark who comes out at night and preys on fearful children. The story is a classic tale, one that every kid and their neighbor like to scare each other with during sleepovers. People come up with several different variations of the story, like how the boogeyman only comes out during the full moon, how it can transform into your greatest fears, or how it lives under your bed and waits for the right moment, right when you are most vulnerable, and snatches you. But I know the truth. There's no such thing as the boogeyman. No. There's only something far different. Something that strays from the legends. Something that you wouldn't expect. How do I know this, you may ask? It's because I saw this thing with my very eyes. I was 9 years old when it happened. I lived in a relatively quiet, peaceful home in the suburbs with my mother and father. Being an only child, I had the privilege of having a large room filled with a vast amount of toys and games all for myself. My parents loved to shower me with presents, and I admit, I was a bit of a spoiled kid. The more things I collected, the less storage space we were getting in my room, and eventually my parents decided I needed somewhere to store all my junk. So a few weeks prior to when it happened, they had found an old secondhand closet and decided it would fit very nicely into my room. As the 11-year-old I was, I did not have much of an option on the wardrobe and let my parents place it and clean it up how they wanted. Days passed without any abnormal happening. I saw my friends from time to time and otherwise played happily with all my games. Days turned into weeks, and soon enough the closet was piled high with my crap. Dust and webs had collected on the top of it. There were a couple of bite marks around the frame, and part of its edge had chipped off due to me being a little too rough while horsing around with my friends. If it looked worn out before, it started to look its age very quickly after entering my bedroom. There was something about this closet that always felt a little off. Like, ever since I got the closet, I always had the feeling that something bad was going to happen. But again, as the kid I was, I took little to no notice to this and brushed it off very quickly. The night it happened, I had been playing with my favorite stuffed toys, making them play fight with each other, which consisted mostly of me smashing them together and throwing them around my room. My playtime was interrupted by the sound of my mother entering the room and telling me it was time for bed. I reluctantly put my toys back in the closet where I usually kept them. My mother then put me to bed and tucked me in, but not before giving me a goodnight kiss, closing the lights, exiting the room, and shutting the door slowly and quietly behind her. I knew it was time for me to sleep, but I just couldn't. I tried. I really did. But I grew relentless, just laying there with too much pent-up energy to relax. I wanted to play, not sleep. Surely one quick game wouldn't hurt, I had thought to myself. I rolled over and watched the door for a few moments until I saw the light from around the border flicking off. I sat up and instantly got to work opening my nightlight, then pattered towards the old closet. In the dim light, the thing felt like it was towering over my little body. I never really realized how large it was until then. I felt myself shivering as I neared the piece of furniture, which I found odd because I didn't feel cold. I ignored this and reached up to the door of the closet as silently as I could as not to alert my parents, and looked in. The toys in the closet were scattered messily, and it was hard to see clearly with the minimal lighting. I frowned and blindly attempted to search for my favorite toys, but to no avail. Frowning deeper, I leaned my body closer into the closet to reach into the back when suddenly I felt my body tumbling forward and right into the mess, the door behind me croaking loudly as I did so. I fumbled for a few moments to catch my footing, but found it was impossible to stand up with all the clutter around me. I scrambled forward to try to find the walls of the closet so I could support myself, but I couldn't seem to find it no matter how far I reached out. I stumbled over myself once more and felt my body drop. A slight panic rose in my chest as I fumbled backwards and finally let myself push on the open door closet and tumble out. I sat there on the floor for a moment, breathing heavily while allowing myself to calm down. It took a moment, but as my eyes adjusted to my surroundings, I quickly realized that I didn't recognize where I was. I knew this because I could see the faint outlines of the walls, and compared to my large, spacey room, this place was tiny. Not only that, but I could feel something soft and woven underneath where I sat, which was a contrast from the hard, cold floors of my own room. I stood and pattered forward cautiously until I hit into something large and stiff. I wasn't sure what exactly I'd bumped into, but before I had the chance to reach out and touch it, I heard a quiet click noise. A light had been turned on, causing me to hiss and squint my eyes in order to adjust from the darkness to sudden brightness that illuminated the room. After a moment of collecting myself, I opened up my eyes and was finally able to see my surroundings. I was in a room of sorts. It was small and painted a light pink color and was adorned with several. A high-pitched sound coming from behind me abruptly interrupted my thoughts, and in an instant I froze up. There was something else here. I was not alone. I swallowed, turned around, and before me, at a little distance, stood the form of a being I had only heard about in night terrors. Its skin was pale and weathered with splotches of deep red stained underneath its wide, beady eyes. Its head was abnormally round, and long, disheveled strands of hair matted its face. Oval-shaped bulges stood out from either side of its face, partially hidden by strands of its hair, but still very much visible. Perhaps the most disturbing feature on its face being the wart placed right in the center that oozed clear liquid out of its holes. Its physique, on the other hand, stood quite short in stature. Its body was oddly symmetrical and proportionate, bones hardly able to be seen through skin due to excess flesh and meat on the creature's body. Its slender limbs had curled in on themselves, and its paws protruded short, round claws at its tips. A fresh wave of fear consumed my being as I locked eyes with the monster, who stood as still as I was. I couldn't move an inch of my body, all motor functions freezing, as if they had all lost responses. But then, without warning, it started moving slowly towards me. It was quivering, twitching. It moved its limb in a tentative way, one short appendage stretching itself in front of the other. It stopped, quickly and suddenly. I could see the figure's small torso breathing in and out at an irregular pace, breathing coming in nothing more than a series of horrifying wheezes. My heart skipped a beat, and I shook in my spot, my own breath labored by panic. I stared into the creature's dark eyes and swallowed, thicker this time, forcing back a ball of anticipation that stuck with it. Any moment now, any sudden movement, and this thing could jump at me, and that would be it. I shifted my eyes around the room, but there was so little space and nowhere to run. The only exit was being blocked off by the monster. But then, something strange happened. The creature retracted slightly and started to make noises. Croaks and cracks and strange sounds came out of the thing's mouth, its facial expressions morphing as it mumbled, its eyes leaking some kind of clear liquid. Was it trying to say something? Was it trying to threaten me? It had to be. There was no other fact. But its voice sounded so minuscule. I was as frightened as I was. Surely it wasn't trying to talk to me. I stared at the creature, stunned and shocked. My thought process told me that maybe I could try to communicate with it, just long enough to stall it and run until I could make it back to safety. And so I timidly opened my mouth and interjected the creature's incoherent sound. Hello? And then there was silence. The creature stiffened at my words, wide eyes becoming impossibly bigger, and pink mouth dropping down into what I recognized as an expression of shock. I thought for a moment that maybe it understood me until an ear-piercing wail erupted from the monster, which caused me to flinch backwards in alarm. The creature threw its head back and shrieked a terrible sound that I had never heard in my life, being nothing short of purely animalistic. In my frozen state, I could see a light begin to illuminate from a small crack of the door and a series of heavy banging sounds that came closer and closer to the room, getting louder as they did so. It was calling its sisters. Realization dawned onto me as fast as the panic rose in my chest. The only thoughts going through my head at the moment was that if I did not get out now, surely I was going to die. I was going to die without my family ever knowing where I went or what happened to me. The banging noises got closer, and I could faintly begin to hear the sound of the other creatures getting closer. Their voices were deeper and less shrilling than the thing in front of me, but were equally as dreading. Adrenaline shot through me, and I suddenly regained control of my legs and made a mad dash for it. I clumsily avoided striking the creature as I bolted past it and straight to the familiarity of the wooden doors I tumbled through to arrive here. I latched onto the handle and tore open the door with might I didn't know I contained. I hauled myself through the door and went to slam it shut before stopping myself last second, realizing quickly that the sound would only alert the monsters of my location. I curled up and stayed as still as possible, as quiet as possible. Through the thin crack of the door, I could only see the back of the monster and not its face. The banging noises coming from its sisters ceased, but I could now clearly hear their voices, and I realized that they must have arrived, standing somewhere I could not see them. Muffled sounds and thuds were all I heard for a couple of moments before a new figure came into my field of vision, and I felt paralyzed in a new wave of fear that overtook me. This thing was massive. It appeared to be a fully fledged version of the wailing creature, a developed version. It crouched down to hold onto the little creature in what seemed like a horse. Soothing sounds came out of its mouth, and it appeared to work because the little creature slowly calmed down from its hysteria. Another, even deeper voice came from behind the door, where I could not see, and the little creature responded to it. Unintelligible sounds came out of its mouth, and to my horror, it stretched out its limbs to point right in my direction, right where I was hiding. I could see the shadow of an even larger creature stepping toward my direction, and I flinched harshly. Blind panic escapes me. I swallowed hard, willing the blur in my vision to disappear, but it refused. I shut my eyes and scooted backwards as far as I could and braced myself for the worst. I kept crawling back and back, waiting for the moment the light would come in and expose my identity. Except it never came. Instead, I felt my back hitting into several little solid items. They clacked and clattered all around me as I pushed backwards in fearful determination to move away. Then I felt myself hitting what must have been the door of the closet and tumbled out, backflipping painfully through the clutter of toys until I finally fell out of the dark closet. For a long moment, I simply laid there on my front, curled in an absolutely fetal position, unwilling to move. I hugged myself tightly with all my limbs to try to stop my body from shaking, but it didn't do much. Then finally, I willed one of my eyes open. I was back in my room. I was back in my room. I couldn't believe it. Nothing had changed since when I left, save for the toys that were now scattered all around me. The closet doors were closed, and then I did the only thing I could think of in that moment. I screamed. I had no idea how long I was screaming for, but all I knew was that my voice was starting to break and I could no longer keep back the cries of absolute anguish I had been holding in me. I was too out of it to notice the banging of my parents' footsteps making their way over to my room, or their voices calling out for me, worried. I didn't process the lights being turned on, and only snapped out of my trance when my mother so softly and so soothingly reached out her 3 arms to cradle me to her bony chest. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Tell Mommy what's wrong." Closet," I rasped and reached out an arm to point directly at the closet. Both my mother and father shot their 8 bright red eyes to each other, then to the closet, then back to me. It was my mother who spoke first. "Oh, sweetie, what's wrong with the closet?" Monster," I mumbled out, shoving my face deeper into the comfort of her bones. I heard my mother whisper something to my father, but couldn't quite make out what they were saying. Then I felt a slender, clawed hand run circles up and down my back. "Daddy's gonna go have a look in the closet, okay?" My mother whispered to me in her calm voice. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell my father to stop before it was too late, but I couldn't. The words literally dying in my throat as if something in me just physically wilted and died. I dared to peek my 3 eyes open, blood turning cold, and watched as he opened the closet doors without a moment of hesitation and found nothing. There was nothing there except a messy pile of my toys and a wooden wall behind it. My father smiled, exposing his sharp fangs in a reassuring way. "See, kiddo, nothing to be worried about." But it was there. There were 3 of them, with 2 arms and legs. It had so much hair and so much flesh. I choked out all in one breath. My mother shushed me and rocked me gently. "Shh. You're really tired, honey. There's nothing there, see? Now why don't we go back to sleep? Oh, here. Why don't you take Mr. Fluffy with you?" Mr. Fluffy, my favorite toy, had been sprawled out on the ground right beside me, its one eye and cute, toothless smile staring straight at me. My father bent over and took Mr. Fluffy into his bristly arms and gently guided me out of my mother's arms to heft me up into his own. He shuffled over to my bedside and placed me onto my bed, tucking me and Mr. Fluffy in, and placed a kiss on my forehead. A wave of exhaustion came over me, and I couldn't help but stifle a yawn. I heard my mother chuckle lightly at the action as she stood beside my father at the edge of the bed. "Are you going to be okay now, sweetie?" Despite the shock I still felt all over my body, I nodded my head slowly. I was just too tired. I didn't want to play anymore. All I wanted to do was sleep. The last thing I heard before I let myself go into the land of dreams was my father's voice whispering, "Remember, kiddo, there's no such thing as the boogeyman." And that was something I definitely was sure of. That concludes tonight's stories. Make sure to smash that subscribe button to show your support for these authors. And make sure to check out the description where I have left the authors' names, as well as the link to the subreddit so you can check out more of these stories.